We're going to start now our last session. So if everyone could take a seat. Oh, silence. Excellent. Well done, everyone. We're nearly there. And I'm very, very pleased to be welcoming Jenny Garrett to our University Press Redux conference to deliver our closing keynote speech. Jenny is an award-winning career coach, leadership trainer, speaker, and author. Her latest book, Equality versus Equity, was published by Emerald in 2023, and in it, Jenny tackles issues of race in the workplace. Today, she'll be sharing with us some important insights from this book around how we can best advance diversity and inclusion. I'm sure that we will find both challenge and inspiration to educate ourselves and do the critical work of achieving racial equity in the workplace. After Jenny's presentation, there will be time for questions, so do take this opportunity to delve further into any areas that particularly interest you. And with that, I'll hand over to Jenny. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful welcome here, and it's been great to be sitting in many of the sessions today, and I've really enjoyed learning a lot more about University Press. I also appreciate you just sticking with it, because I know the sunshine is beckoning. But I want you to think, imagine if the workforce, the authors that you supported, the whole industry was diverse. If it represented the society in which we are serving. Perhaps when I say that, you think, well, it is quite diverse. And I must say, this is one of the most inclusive conferences that I've been along to. Or maybe you think that's a bit of a utopian dream and something that's going to be really hard to achieve. And maybe both are true. But one thing I think it definitely is a competitive edge. And in a sector where you are thinking about your survival, thinking about how you sustain what you're doing, thinking about how you stay current and relevant, perhaps thinking more about equality, equity, diversity, and inclusion might be the secret weapon that you've been needing. Now, many of you will be very versed in this world. You may have done a lot of work around it already. You might know that actually diversity, equity, and inclusion is the key really for innovation and creativity, sustainability. It's the key to unlocking new ideas. Maybe even the key to not being cancelled by those who might have become your authors or read your publications. But there's a lot more to it than that. In fact, what we really need to do is start to see things differently. I think what we're doing when we think a lot about equality and equity, diversity and inclusion, is we're thinking through our current lens. We're thinking through our lived experience, the way we see the world. And as a result, we keep coming back to the same solutions. So I'm going to ask you to do something. If you have a pen in hand, you can use a pen, but you can also use a finger if you wish. And I'm going to ask you to do something. If you just watch me do it, first of all, I'm going to ask you to point your pen or your finger up at the ceiling and draw a clockwise circle, and then keep the integrity of the circle until it's just below your waist. Okay? Everyone clear? Yeah? Okay, let's do it together. Clockwise circle. Keep it going. Keep the circle going until it's just below your waist. And keep it going. And now it's below your waist. I want you to tell me which direction it's going in. Anti-clockwise. Now, why is it going anti-clockwise? Is it this John McIntyre building? Is there something strange happening? Or is it something else? It's nothing spooky, honestly. It's our shift in perspective. It's the difference between looking up and looking down. But quite often when we're going into this world, looking into this world of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we continue to look up, when perhaps what we need to do is look down. We need to look at this differently. We need to look at it creatively in order to come up with the very best solutions. And we need to start appreciating difference. If you think about the sector that you work in, if you think about where you are right now, how much do you actually do that? I want you to really challenge yourself. Not how much do you tolerate other people, how much do you accept them, but how much do you appreciate them? There is a difference. I'll accept that you work in the same environment as me. Okay, I'll allow you to work in the same environment as me as long as you are similar to me, or you bring something very different to me. It might not be the way I've seen the world, experienced the world, the way I'd communicate, the way I'd bring myself to the table, but actually there's something very valuable in that. And that ability to appreciate and also think about how you leverage that difference is what I think is often missing. How can we celebrate it? How can we make the most of it? The challenge is that we live in the goldfish bowl of our experience. Goldfish, I don't believe, although I've never been in the mind of a goldfish, I don't think they consider water. Just like day by day, we don't think about the air we breathe. But if you took the goldfish out of water, or if you took the oxygen out of the air, I'd be suffering. And I'd realize there's a whole world where perhaps there is no oxygen. Our challenge is that we don't think outside that goldfish bowl. We don't often put ourselves in an environment where we can see the world differently. And being able to do that can give us a new perspective and a new way of engaging in the way we consider diversity, equity, and inclusion in our organizations. Now, you might say, I've had some fantastic conversations during this conference. I've had so many different perspectives, new ways of thinking, enlightening conversation. Maybe people have challenged you as well. And I'm sure that's true. However, there may have also been a lot of similarity. So I'm going to ask you 3 quick questions, and I want you to answer these questions quickly in your mind. I don't want you to say it out loud. I want you to think of the first color that you can think of. I want you to think of the first piece of furniture that you can think of. And I want you to think of the first flower that you can think of. Now raise your hand if you had red or blue. Look around the room. A lot of similar answers, but also some difference. Raise your hand if you said chair, sofa, chaise longue, that kind of thing. Look around the room. Okay. And the last one was flower. So raise your hand if you had rose or daisy. Look around the room. Now, thank you. When we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, of course, we're talking about all of the characteristics, the protected characteristics, and the intersection of those identities. And I'm going to talk more about that. But we are also thinking about diversity of thought. Now, because I asked you to think quickly, you went to the well-trodden paths in your minds. Yeah? You thought, what the first color I can think of, red, blue, probably the first colors you were ever taught. And you went along that usual rut, that usual groove. It's well-trodden path in your mind. And the same thing you did when I asked you the other questions. Now, if I'd given you half an hour, I may have heard, birds of paradise, and you may have said colors like fawn or magenta. I may have had so much more diversity. So I don't want to limit you. But how often are we thinking quickly? How often are we under pressure to make decisions? Most of the time, we are working at pace. And what that means is, actually, we go to the places where we're not having so much diversity of thought. Now, if this was an even more international audience, an even more diverse audience, when we think about other characteristics, perhaps I might have got more diversity, even though I was asking people to think very quickly. And actually, if I'd done this at the beginning of the conference, I would have encouraged you to seek out conversations with those who didn't go to the same places as you when they have to think very quickly. We need to do this in all of our fields, in where we're working, in all of our environments, to think about the authors that you bring in, to think about the communities you reach, to think about where you go for knowledge. Because that very quick test told us that sometimes we can really go to the same places very quickly, because that is what we know. Now, I said a moment ago about the intersection of our identities. Who's seen this diagram before? Okay, a few of you. I think this can really help us think about how unique and individual we are. The fact is that we often try and distill people down to one thing. You're a woman, you're a man, you're black, you're Muslim. But there's so much more to us than that. We are an intersection of many identities. And as you know, some of these come with more privilege than others in our society. So the things that you can see closer to the centre give us more privilege in UK society and in the world generally, actually. And as we go further and further out, then we can see that those people are more likely to be marginalised. I think this is useful for us to consider, because you might have employee resource groups, you might have metrics that you are monitoring in your organisations. But as Kimberly Crenshaw says, who is the scholar who came up with this term intersectionality, if we don't start to consider the intersection of people's identities, some people fall through the cracks. And I say this because I go into many organisations where they'll say women done, tick. And I think that actually, if you think about your own sector, I think that it's probably quite female dominated. So you could say, well, we don't have a challenge when it comes to women. But then when we start to think about other aspects of identity, you might say, well, how many non-English first language speaking women do we have? How many women do we have from lower socio-economic backgrounds? How many women do you have from ethnically diverse backgrounds? And when you start to think about it with the intersection of identities, you can start to realize that perhaps we're not talking about all women. We're talking about some women. And what does that mean for the women whose voice isn't in the room? And that's just one aspect of our intersections. But whatever data you have, whatever data you're using, when you're thinking about the people that you engage with, it's really important to start cutting across. And I did notice all day today that you're really keen on data. I saw every time someone put a graph up, everyone was taking pictures. So think about your own data. Yeah, think about your own data and what you can deduce from it. So I've got a few questions for you, and I just want you to shout out. So according to, I think this is ONS data, people from ethnically diverse communities are overrepresented in the ranks of the unemployed. The data from the ONS showed that 4% of white people were unemployed in 2021, compared to what percentage of those from ethnically diverse groups? Shout out, any ideas? Quick. 30? 20? Okay. Actually, you're over. It's not as high as that, but it still is double. Yeah? So when we think about, our experiences and our living and working life, 8%, double the amount is quite a lot. Another one for you, and I need you to answer much more quickly this time. Okay, so there are significant gaps in the percentage of people with a disability in employment. From July to September 2022, data published from the ONS highlighted that there were 4.9 million people with a disability in employment in the UK. So 82% of non-disabled people were in employment, compared to what percentage of people with a disability? 20. Okay, you sound confident then, thank you. Or maybe you're just answering very quickly. So 53%, so there's an employment gap of 29% according to this data that I was looking at. Again, a huge gap. So this starts to help you think about, people's different experience. We can think, give everyone the same thing and they will equally succeed. But what this data tells us is that that's not the case, actually, because some people are not starting out from the same position. Another one, research from Stonewall's 2018 report for those from the LGBTQ plus community highlights that 3% of people from the LGBTQ plus community have been physically attacked by customers or colleagues in their workplace, compared to what percentage when they're from an ethnically diverse background. Now, I just want to say 3%, 1%, any percent is awful because no one should be attacked in the workplace. But what percentage do you think if you're also from an ethnically diverse background? 15, 10. Okay, 10. If there was a prize, you'd have it. Yeah, so 10%. Going up by 7%, again, over double, over triple the same percentage. And the last one, according to the World Economic Forum, what percentage of black women have never had an informal interaction with a senior leader in their company?
40.
Higher? 70. Or not as high? Oops, sorry. 59%. Now, why does that matter? Well, it matters because those informal conversations with senior leaders are typically the ones that lead to sponsorship. They're the ones that lead to someone advocating for you in rooms that you are not in and help you advance your career. Most of us can think of someone in our career who has been that person who's helped us through, who's helped us move forward. And if 59% of black women never get that opportunity, it's very likely they are at a disadvantage in their careers. So I hope these stats are bringing it to life for you, that actually we're not all starting from the same place. We have very different experiences. And as Nikki said at the beginning, my book is about equality versus equity. Who here manages people, line manages people? Yeah, so quite a lot of you, thank you very much. And the challenge with managing people, I manage people too, is that no one wants to be accused of unfairness. Nobody wants that. No one wants to say you've got a favorite and you're treating them differently. But ultimately, this idea of equity is exactly that. It's not about favoritism, but it is about saying, what do my colleagues need to be able to be successful? And actually, different people will need different interventions, different support, different ways of working in order to be successful. So the old narrative was, for equality, treat everyone the same, have a collective approach, manage them, maybe hold on to their power. And actually, if I treat everyone the same, it's bound to get the same, an equal outcome. We know that hasn't worked. We know it hasn't worked. So equity is about really considering the systems that disadvantage and seeking to overcome them. And it might mean that one person works flexibly. It might mean that another person has more training and more courses. It might mean that another person, actually, you give them a bit more time and support in order for them to hit the same place. It requires a very individual approach, getting to know your colleagues, understanding their humanity and what they need. And it needs leadership. It needs us to step out of a place of managing people to thinking about how you lead and how you role model, how you express your own vulnerability in order to support them. And it's about not having to know all the answers or being expert. I loved what the last gentleman said. He said, we hold on to things too long and we don't just try them and learn and grow. It's the same way. This is about, actually, I don't know it all. And I'm going to share some of my power because maybe you know more about your own experience than I do. Maybe you know more about an audience than I do. And your knowledge can be really helpful. And the key is that it's outcomes driven. If you are leading with equity, if more people who were not succeeding or being represented in your organization are now breaking through. That's when you know, because it's about the outcomes. It's not just about trying hard, it's about the difference that it makes. And that's what we all want. We all want to take action. For me, how I see it is this seesaw that you can see here. Has everyone been on a seesaw at some point, maybe many years ago? Yeah, okay. I worked with a Canadian audience recently. They call them teeter-totters. Yeah, just a bit of fun fact. So, what often happens in organizations is a little bit like this. This is how I see it. So if you start with the top left, there are some people who, by accident at birth, are a bit more powerful, and there are others who are not so powerful. When we were in the park, when we were much younger, it was the heavier, taller person. They were bumping us on that seesaw, and it wasn't a great experience. They could leave us high and dry for quite some time, and it was a little bit scary. Yeah? What we're trying to do is understand what people need, and we put sandbags in place. That can be sponsorship, it can be more diverse panels, it can be thinking about particular training programs that enable people to succeed from marginalized backgrounds or enable leaders to become more inclusive. There are many things that we can do and that you may already be doing in order to start balancing that seesaw. But I want to say that when you start to do this work, it's not necessarily straightforward. The person who's had power previously can be fearful and resistant. I was the person who would have got that opportunity before. Now it feels like it's going to someone else. And they can feel quite resentful and even sabotage the process. So it's about taking people along with you. And on the other side, the person who's been marginalized in the past, actually, it can be a bit scary to suddenly get opportunities. You might not trust that process if the psychological safety isn't there. You might think they're giving something to me, but what are they going to take away? What if it goes wrong? I remember years ago, I worked for an organization, and there was a lot of micromanagement. They tried to change the culture, and they started giving lots of autonomy. Everyone was really suspicious of it. We thought it was a trick. And the second thing was, it was like, what do I do with this autonomy? Maybe someone should just tell me what to do. So that process happens. And I'm sharing that because your process is that you are all working through in order to become the most inclusive organizations, attract the best talent, etc. It can have a really difficult point as you go through this. But ultimately, where we're trying to get to is the bottom that you see here, personalization and cooperation. This place where actually we give people what they need to be successful. And there's give and take on the seesaw. We know we're giving power, we're taking power away, and we're agreeing to do that and appreciating what we both bring. There's something more than the park, though, and I think when you think about new people coming into your organization, especially if you're thinking about recruiting people who have different backgrounds to yourself or different backgrounds to the majority group, is that their starting point might be different. Maybe they never went to a play park. Maybe they got to the play park and the other parents said, don't play with that kid, they're probably a bad kid. Maybe they looked at the play park from a distance because they had caring responsibilities or they weren't allowed to go. So even this diagram helps you think about the fact that this frame of reference might be familiar to many of you, but it might be completely unfamiliar to some others. And the openness to understand that is a really important starting point. So how do we change things? How do we make things happen? I've got 10 top tips for you because I think it's really important to have some practical things to be able to take away. The first is, don't just tick a box. Don't go about any of this work in a performative way. What I mean is, okay, we need to recruit more diverse people, more diverse authors, more diverse staff. We're just going to do it without that thought process. We're not going to put anything else in place, no buddying, no support, no conversations for ourselves to think about how we can be more inclusive. We're just going to tick a box. That's not going to be sustainable. That's not going to help you. And I think those tokenistic activities, sometimes they do a lot more harm, in fact. So just be careful about going about what you do in a really strategic and considered way. Sometimes that slows things down, but in the end, it will deliver more for you. Stop searching for the unicorns. And what I mean by that is maybe you're looking for the perfect person with a disability. Maybe you're looking for the perfect person from an ethnically diverse background. And when you're looking for that, maybe it's the most excellent person ever, or maybe it's the person who's most like you and just has that one characteristic that's slightly different. We know unicorns don't exist. Sadly, I hope I'm not bursting any bubbles here. So, actually what you need is someone who brings something different and can be good at their job. And I think that sometimes the standard to which we're holding someone from a different background is far too high and unachievable. And also, just sometimes we're just not looking at it from a different perspective. What do they say? If you try to judge a fish by its ability to ride a bicycle, well, it's always going to fail. Yeah? So what are you judging people by? Is it the right frame, or should you be looking differently? Expand your trusted circle. I think this is one of the maybe most enlightening and easiest things to do. To have a sheet of paper, to think about the most trusted 10 people in your circle who are not your family members, and then create a grid. Gender, ethnicity, religion, nationality, all the characteristics, education, attainment. Think about these different things and just look at your grid. It will tell you a lot. It will tell you about the diverse makeup of these trusted 10 people, but it will also tell you where the gaps are. And of course, we can't fill every gap immediately, but it can focus your mind on thinking, gosh, I do not have any friends from this particular community or people in my trusted circle. What can I do to change that? Can I have a coffee with someone that I know, but I haven't brought them into my trusted circle? Or what particular activity can I do to strengthen that relationship and really turn it into something where I'm going beyond, I just know some people who have different backgrounds to me, to actually I'm really engaging with people, really connected, really getting to know them. I've got a friend who she homeschools, and she's gone to a lot of homeschooling groups. And she's a black woman, and she goes to these homeschooling groups, and often she's the only black woman in those groups. And she says, everyone's nice to me, but no one invites me into their home. Yeah? So being in the trusted circle is when you would invite that person into your home. And I'm not saying you have to invite everyone into your home, but it's that example of, yes, you might have people around you, but do you take the next step? So everyone's heard of IQ, our intelligence, EQ, our emotional intelligence, but there's also CQ, our cultural intelligence. And there's a lot of work we can do around that, a lot of work we can do to understand where people are coming from and why they behave the way they do. When we talk about ethnicity, for example, I've worked with people who have an African heritage who will say they find it really difficult to manage someone who's older than them, because in their culture, that would be someone who would be more revered and who'd be telling them what to do. And so actually having to change that and manage those people and tell them what to do feels really difficult. Or I've worked with organizations where there are people who were born in South India, maybe lived in South India a lot of their life and then come to the UK, and they want to be very respectful and formal of their line managers, and they want to call them Mr. whatever or Mrs. etc. And they're saying, no, just call me by my first name. When we're culturally intelligent, we start to understand where all of this is coming from. And we also understand that there's no right or wrong, but we start to think about how we create the bridge. So the cultural intelligence piece can be really helpful for you. And I know a lot of you are working internationally, so I'm not saying you don't have any, but there might be more to explore around this. And I do a lot of work with the work of David Livermore. So if you are looking to explore that some more, he's a great author to start looking into. I think, what can we do around diverse leadership? This image they call the John Wall in America. You know, an image of going into an organization, lots of white men who have held the role before. And if I was going for a job interview and I saw that, probably I'd think I'm not going to get it. You know, if I'm going for a leadership role, I don't fit the mold. I'm probably not what they're looking for. So what can we do about it? Because I'm not saying everyone needs to leave their job who's in a senior role, because that wouldn't make sense either. Well, you can get shadow boards. You can recruit a second board to shadow the board you have, so that those people can bring in their diverse perspectives and ideas. And that can also be a way of starting to think about succession planning as well. But what else can you do? Maybe just not have these pictures on the wall. Have some, you know, I stayed at the Scott last night. There was some beautiful art there. You know, we can have so much diverse art on the wall. But, you know, when we think about diverse leadership, I also think there's something about leaders being more open. So I've worked with many leaders who, on the face of it, you might say, okay, there's not that much diversity in the room. But then they might tell me about their children who are from the LGBTQ+ community, or they might tell me about a partner who has a disability, or they might share that they started off life from a lower socioeconomic background, but they're not saying that publicly. They might say it to me on a one-to-one coaching conversation. And I think the openness to share a little bit more when you're in a senior role can really help other people connect with you, but understand you, and also feel able to be more open themselves. So there are many ways to consider this idea of diverse leadership. And you know, there are many different types of diversity. I'm a real fan of 2 part-time leaders in a role, and we don't do that enough. You know, how can we do things differently? I mentioned sponsorship earlier, and I mentioned that stat around Black women not having an informal interaction with a senior leader. Sponsorship is powerful. If you have people within your organization from marginalized, underrepresented groups, a senior leader who gets to know them, advocates for them, open doors for them, is a game changer. And there's a huge amount of research to show that. Because informal sponsorship does not happen when you are from an underrepresented group, because we all have affinity bias. We all are attracted to people who are similar to ourselves. So what we do is we say, oh, I recognize myself in you. You know, I'll take you under my wing. You know, that's what we do. Or we have some connection because we like the same holidays. We like going to doing the same things or reading the same books. Okay, I'll sponsor you. And so those people who do not fit into that mold don't get the sponsorship. So formalizing that, or if you're a senior leader, going out of your way to find someone from a different background to you to sponsor them is an amazing thing to do. And I think I've heard some of this today, but tapping into the wisdom of the Global South. Yeah? The wisdom coming from many different places. You know, who are we quoting? Where are we getting our knowledge from? Even when we're thinking about management, leadership, we're thinking about our strategies for the work we do, where are we going for our wisdom? Yeah? And I think even starting to do that, the more we can do that, the more it opens up our mind. It creates different pathways in our mind in terms of the way we are thinking. Ultimately, if you are thinking about really creating equity in your organizations, be careful that you are not blinded. The research says that 69% of women have feedback on their personal style when they go into appraisals, compared to 1% of men. Yeah? When people are from a group, and I know in your sector women are a majority, but when people are from an underrepresented group, they get a lot of feedback on their style, on the way they are doing things, on how they're showing up, rather than on the work they're doing and the quality of what they are producing. So do make sure you're looking at the substance, not the style, when you're making your decisions. And lastly, work on yourself. In my book, I have a lot of reflective questions to help you challenge yourself, think differently about how you lead, and how you engage with others. Ultimately, this starts with you. Nothing changes in university press unless all of you change. There is no university press. There's only people. And so if everyone makes a small change, ultimately everything will. I think I might be going over time. Okay, I've got a minute. The other thing I'm going to say is I feel that you're all wonderfully nice people, and I do a lot of work in the charitable sector full of really lovely people. But what happens when you are really nice is that actually having the tough conversations doesn't always happen. Yeah, the calling it in, if you hear someone say something inappropriate, etc., you don't say what needs to be said. And I think that, one of the brave things that you can do is if you hear something, see something, is call it in. And I say call it in as opposed to call it out because I don't think it's about naming and shaming and blaming. It's much more about educating. So some quick ways to do that. If someone says something that you think, oh, they shouldn't have said that, just ask them a bit more about what they mean. Be curious. I've got a teddy bear on the slide because it's tell me, explain, describe. Just be curious. Where are you coming from? What are you saying here? It's a really good way to just engage in that conversation and help bring the person in to see maybe they made a genuine mistake. By questioning them, they challenge themselves. Or maybe they need some help from you to understand that that wasn't okay to say. Another thing you can do is separate their intention from their impact. And by that I mean, actually, maybe you said that thing, you didn't realize that it wasn't okay. I know that you're a good person, you would never say something intentionally like that, but this is the impact it had. And actually you could say something different in the future. Yeah? So these are ways you can do this, even if you're wonderfully nice people. Yeah? There are the ways you can have this conversation. And the last one, I noticed you said or did this thing. I used to say that too, but then I learned. And I think names are a big one here. Yeah? Well, non-anglicized names are often not pronounced correctly, or they're made into another name that's easier. You can call that in and help people be able to do that. I'm going to stop talking so that we have time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Where do you want me? Where do you want me?
Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. That was tremendous. We'll open the floor to questions. We've got a few minutes. Simon's there. If you could say your name and your organisation first, that would be great. Thank you.
Thanks very much for a really insightful talk. You cover a lot there. I'm Simon Holt and I work for Elsevier. One of the most damning indictments that I've heard of equity, diversity and inclusion efforts within the publishing industry is when somebody said to me, I feel that the publishing industry wants people who look different but think the same. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. The whole point about diversity and inclusion is about diversity of perspective, mm-hmm. right? Because then we make better business decisions. Mm-hmm. My particular flavour with my lived experience is about disability inclusion, but I think thinking about it from an intersectional point of view, I see a lot of people from all different dimensions doing a lot of masking in this industry, to be quite honest with you, right? So we may have people from different dimensions in leadership roles, but all too often I see them not really, I see them transforming into something else that I don't particularly recognise because they feel they need to fit the mould when they get to that leadership role. And that normally means pulling the drawbridge up and not really, being a trailblazer for others. So I wanted to ask you, thinking about your experience, how can we make cultural change to ensure that people have to mask less and actually are able to bring that diversity perspective at all levels, and that it doesn't disappear when people get a bit higher up the chain?
Yeah. I've got a lovely example for you, actually, of someone's real experience. So this was a person from an ethnically diverse background working in an organization, and they went for promotion. And the person said, I'm going to promote you not to the next level, to the level above, on the condition that you will be yourself and not let go of that. So you need to be explicit about it, because if I'm going to work in your organization and everyone looks different to me, speaks differently to me, behaves differently to me, I will absorb the fact that assimilation is what I have to do to get on. The only way I'm able not to do that is for you to say to me, what you bring is different and I value it and we appreciate it and I'm going to defend who you are. And it needs that sort of brave, bold, open conversation. I would say the people who maybe are in those senior roles, as I kind of mentioned, need to be a bit more open about who they are as well, because no group is a monolith, and many people are masking. There was a Deloitte study about, they call it covering as opposed to masking, and they said 60% of people are covering in organizations. It's higher when you're from a marginalized group, but so many people are doing it. So this idea of openness and being you needs to come from the top. But particularly when you have someone from an underrepresented group, you need to be explicit about the fact that you appreciate their difference, you want them to hold on to it, and you will defend it. And that's what I would say on that. I don't know if that helps answer your question. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you. Thank you, Jenny. That was really inspirational. I'm Caroline Edwards at the Open Library of Humanities, and we work at Birkbeck, University of London. And as I suspect many university presses here, our university is our parent organisation. So whilst I'm responsible for line managing a team of 10 people and we have our own workplace culture, and I try very hard to incorporate some of the things you've described, I still have to fit all of my managerial decision-making and particularly things to do with promotion and pay and things like that within a highly regulated, bureaucratically managed process at the university. And this has an impact on things like diversity. And I wondered what your advice is for helping those of us in these very largely conservative organisations to try and help bring up our colleagues, from a different ethnicity or background when we keep meeting kind of blocks along the way because of the preset criteria by the university who they're happy to talk about diversity and they're happy to include a diversity of staff on their website, but when it comes to actually trying to advocate for pulling people up alongside you, they tend to sort of block things off.
Yeah, I think that's a huge and very real challenge. It's a little bit difficult for me to specifically comment on, without the full detail there. But what I would say is there are some really great examples of creativity, and I don't know how much you are able to change roles that people have, for example. So what I don't know is it the criteria or is it the budget? I'm not quite sure when I listen to you. But what I would say is if it comes to criteria, cutting roles up in different ways to enable someone to be able to take it on can be a really creative way. And I've seen that done really effectively. So you may need this qualification or you may need this particular experience. That actually probably isn't that relevant. And actually cutting it up in a different way so the person could be promoted. Sometimes you need to do that. So I think it's creativity. I think it's about, we're not going to do things the way we've always done. What is our new perspective? What is our different way of looking at this? and what has to happen. The other thing I think is worth always talking about is the consequences. You know, you might lose an amazing member of staff, and even if they don't care about that, maybe they care about the stats. I don't know. So sometimes we have to talk to people with a language that makes a difference. But I think it is a challenging one, because if you're not able to do it, you're likely to lose someone. What's the consequence for you? You know, what's the cost of recruiting a new person, etc. But perhaps you've had these arguments already. Okay.
Anything else on the floor? Over there.
My name is John. I just want to make sure you understand.
Hi, John.
I'm John Sharon from the University of North Carolina Press. So I work in a state where there's a political backlash going on to conversations about equity. And in fact, equity is being described as substandard to equality, that equality for everybody is what matters, and that equity is privileging people. And so I'm just curious, and I'm sure you're following this, I'm just very curious whether you have reflections or ideas about how to navigate that type of environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's absolutely happening in the US, and it is coming into the UK as well, you know, some of this very same conversation. And it's really challenging, because I know funding is being taken away for jobs with diversity in the title. And I know that in the UK, they're talking about doing the same thing in local authorities, so sort of councils, we're calling them. So this is very real. When I was researching for my book, there's a man called Garrett, and he talks about interest conversion having to be in place for change to happen. Now, in 2020, when the killing of George Floyd happened, everybody cared about that. We had people from ethnically diverse backgrounds cared, and the world cared, because we were at home and there was COVID and it looked like the worst of humanity was happening. So we had interest conversion, which meant that we all, you know, people sprung into action. Now, it can be argued, does everyone feel the same interest now? And I think that is what's happening. That some people are like, well, I don't have the same interest anymore. I'm getting on with my life. Things have moved on, when they haven't really happened. In addition, the other thing he says is that this work is always shape-shifting. And I think it was always going to happen that it was going to start to look different. So for me, I'm seeing that some people's interest has moved away because it doesn't affect them directly anymore, and that is why this is happening. But inevitably, it was going to happen because it was going to shift. And for me, the work, there's so much great work that's been done. We've been going uphill with our foot on the accelerator, and it will be a crime if we take our foot off the accelerator and go right back again, because we'll have to start this whole process again. And what I think is that we need to have some different kinds of conversations. I think the people who are not on board need to feel listened to. And I think perhaps they haven't felt listened to. And I do think we need to have the full conversation. So it's not just about race, it's about the intersection of identities, but we still do include race in that. But we might look at it from a social mobility lens, and then we add, because it still does end up talking about race if you're looking at social mobility, for example. So a kind of short summary of what I'm trying to say is, I see what's happening. I kind of anticipated it happening, and I don't think that it's the end of the world. I think it's another opportunity to have different conversations, re-find where we can have interest conversion, and then move forward again in a different way.
Okay, thank you. We've got time for one more if there is anything from the floor. Yes, Bernie.
Thank you, Bernie from ASPA. You mentioned you're a big fan of sharing a leadership role between two people. Can you say something about that, why you think that and what that brings? Thank you.
Absolutely. I think that flexibility, we don't have enough leadership roles where there's flexibility. I've been in rooms where people will talk about part-time leadership roles and people will say, no, it's impossible. But it has been done and been done successfully. I think you bring, especially, if we have difference there, you bring diversity of perspective, diversity of thought. You have the compound effect of having two people in role, and potentially someone who might not have the capacity or the ability to have a 5-day or 7-day week, whatever this role is, to be able to do it, can enter into that role. It gives opportunity as well. I just think there are so many good reasons to do this. And also, so many times when the leader leaves, so many things just disappear because it's all been on that sort of heroic person's shoulders. Typically, two people are not going to leave at the same time in that leadership role. So what you do is you always have some consistency as well. So those are just a few reasons why I think it's great. I don't know if you're aware of TimeWise. They do a lot of research in this area. They're really fantastic. And I would advocate, if you're interested in that, looking at their website and what they do, because I think, it's time for creativity. It's time to shake things up. We don't have to have roles in the way we used to.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks so much,
Thank
Jenny.
you.
That's just been wonderful. So if you could join me in thanking Jenny. Thank you.